And we continue learning Dirshu Mishna Berurah, continuing Hilchos Nesias Kavayim Siman Kuf Chav Ches, and we're up to Sif Lamed Gimel. Says the Machaber, She'ein mi she'ein yodea, someone who does not know, lachatoich, as we turn over the page over here, lachatoich ha'isiyos, he's not able to enunciate the letters correctly. Says the Machaber, Kigoin, for example, Shaimer la'alvin einin u'einin alvin u'chayetz bazeh, which of course in our way that we speak is a little bit different because we don't really have that much of a difference. Sephardim have a larger difference between an aleph and an ayin, as more of that guttural sound. The halacha is lo yisa as kapov. This invalidates one from dochening. So it says the Mishnah Berurah over here, Sivkatan Kuf Yotes, She'eni Yedea, he doesn't know to lachtei chayse. He says the Mishnah Berurah v'adin mishu kva be'u ka'al lashon, someone who has a heavy mouth or a heavy tongue. So what does this mean? Before we turn over, we take a glance at the Dirshu over here, number 126, and Dirshu says that if he's able to say the words properly, even though he doesn't say them smoothly, says the Divrei Chaim that you're allowed to duchen. So what this fine nuance of kvabeh, kvaloshain, and not able to say the letters straight is not so simple. But either way, we continue and we move on to the Mishnah Berurah over here. I apologize that the page is a drop too big. Yeah, there we go. Everyone should be able to see that a little bit better. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sivkatan Kuf Chaf, La'alfin Einin Vu'adin, and similarly, Mishakar L'Chesen Heyin, someone who messes up his cheses and his hays, Oishakar L'Shiboiles, Siboiles, Vimkol B'nei Iroi Kayin Kach, but if everyone pronounces the words this way, then Motor Lisa Kap of Shambai Samakam, he's able to dochen. Umitam Zekos V'achrainim, as we pointed out, Memelo Motor Lisa Kap of Yulad Dochin. Vishamer Moit, the Medinas Russia, Shagil and Arbi, like Roshibalis, Siboilis. After Bchal and Shebedina Yodim, average of Shin Yeminis Lismalit, even though they know the difference between the Shin and the Sin, but still for some reason they say Shiboilis as Siboilis, Mikol Makam Mutter, Lisa Kapov, still you are allowed to duchen. And we continue with Sif Lamed Dalit. Says the Mechaber Katan Shlevi Shtei Sairos. A Katan, good morning, did not bring Shtei Sairos, they didn't say his Kapov is not allowed to duchen. Bifnei Atzmei Klal, if he's duchening by himself, he's not allowed to. Aval, however, Ema Kohanim Shem Gedolim, no say, if there are other Kohanim that are duchening, then Lilmaid Ules Chanich, then he is allowed to duchen with them as a form of chinuch. Once a child, even though he's not a gadol, but he brought Shtei Seiros, then he's allowed to duchen even by himself. Umihu continues the Machaber. Tavka ba'akroi ba'alma. V'loi b'kviyas, he can't daven in a certain way, that manner. Achi Yismael is kanoi, until he has facial hair. Sha'az, then Yachal Isakab Afilu B'chidi Kava, then he can duchen even by himself. Once Ron reaches the age in which it is Rai, it is the normal age that one has his beard full. Even though he himself does not, Karinam Bey Nismale is Kanai, we consider him such as, and Vayan Lelsim on Gimel Sev Ches. So says the Mishnah Berurah over here, let's understand when a katan could duchen, when a katan cannot duchen, etc. So says the Mishnah Berurah of katan Kov Chav Aleph Shleivi Yoshay Cyrus V'nasa Ben Yud Gimel Shana V'Yoyim Echad, when he becomes 13 years and one day, Talina Linian Zeshem Mistamnei V'Shtei Cyrus, as we find in many areas of halacha, we assume that he brought Shtei Cyrus. Interesting to note is that the Shartzian points out that this is not like the Magen Avram, Elirav, Magen Barim, but the Magen Avram disagrees with this psak. Let's, before we even continue, scroll up and look at Dirshu note number 129. Says Dirshu, reminding us what we learned in Siman Hey, The Mishnah Berurah over there, Sivkot Lamed Aleph, taught us that the difference is Derabanan versus Deraisa. Shebetinim Derabanan, Seimchan al Chazaka Sharev Anshe Shekil Lechal Shanim. For Derabanans, we assume that he reached the appropriate age, that we assume that he brought Shtei Cyrus. Whereas, of course, for Deraisas, we would not. And we continue with the Mishnah Berurah, Sivkot and Kov Chav Beis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, so if he did not bring Shtei Cyrus, then he's not even allowed to dochen bakrai. Shein kavod tzira liyas kfuf in the berachas katan. It's not kavod that we're all kafuf, we're all bound to the bracha of a katan. So it's not appropriate that a katan who is a katan who didn't bring Shtei Cyrus, that he is the one dochening on his own for everyone. Lil moed ules chanin. Sivkat and Kufchav Gimel, but if they're Gedalim, then this Katan is allowed to dochin together with them. Explains the Mishnah Berurah, Umitam Zeh, for this reason, Rashi Levar Kamkin, he himself is allowed to say the bracha. He is being yoyte his own chinuch, so he himself couldn't make the bracha according to the Magen Avraham. V'chinkos v'arvaz t'chelav sim tav kuf samach hey. V'chinuch zeh, ein like yishar zmani chinuch. This is not like other types of chinuch shu kvar chamesh kvar shes at age 5, at age 6. Kim b'sheidel yisekabav kimin hagei hakehanim. But rather it goes by the age that the child knows how to dochin like a kohanim. Sifgad kol chavdal romiu gamzehu mitam kavod atzibar shein kavoidam is not their kavod sheyavarchen that they should receive the bracha tamid bekava all the time. Yibichidi ishlin ismael dayin zikanei. And again, this gives us more of an insight as to that once we understand the reasoning over here is al kavod atzibur, so we can understand that it makes sense that he's a gadol. Could be he's 14 years old, but doesn't have the appropriate facial hair. It's not covered for the tzibur that they're receiving the bracha from him. But ba'akrais of kavta and kuf chavei ubdina seinu she'noisin kapavel biyam toif. Says Mishnah Berurah, 1 second. Akrai, keva, what's going on? We only dochin on yantiv. Therefore, mutal isakav chol regel afilu b'vnei atzmai. He can even dochin by himself. That's considered akrai. One might think, what do you mean? We only dochin a few times a year, so maybe each time has a din of keva. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. Vayin lel simin in the Mishnah Berurah sivkat and kochavav. Kalaimar the shamavur davilo hiloi zaka in muat. A little bit of a beard, so at age 18, even if he does not have a lot of facial hair, he is considered a gadol. Before age 18, he needs to have his full face filled with his beard in order to be the one that's dochening by himself. Before we move on, let's go back to Dirshu note number 130. Dirshu points out that when a katan, if a kohen who is a katan is oila with a gadol, so we learned in Sivkat Lamachas, the Paiskim argue whether you say kohanim. We remember that you only call out kohanim if you have more than one kohen. So over there we learned out if you have two kohanim, but one's a katan, then it is a machlekes kohanim. At what age does a child begin dochening for chinuch? Says Dirshu note number 131. What does it mean? At the age that he knows that a dochen like kohanim, this is mashma. It's not enough that he knows to dochen, but he needs to know how to do like the kohanim do. What does that mean? That means to hold his hands in the appropriate manner and above his head, etc. Similarly, we find in Siman Yud Zayin, when a katan comes to put on tzitzis, it's only if he knows how to tie the tzitzis, and then that's when he has the chiyuv. He knows how to hold the tzitzis by kriyishma. It's not just that he knows the concept of tzitzis, which usually is where the chinuch in other areas comes from. And we conclude with Sif Lamed Hey. Says the Mechaber, Koyin Sharig an Nefesh, if a Koyin Rachmana Litzlan killed someone, Afilu Bishayi, was by mistake, Lo Yisa Eskabov, he's not allowed to dochen anymore. Afilu Asa Tshuva. Even if he did Tshuva, fascinating. Usually we find Tshuva completely rewrites history. But over here, with regard to a Koyin, if a Koyin unfortunately killed someone, he's not allowed to dochen for the rest of his life. Says the Ramav, Yeshayim de Masa Tshuva. Some argue and say, no, if he did Tshuva, he could dochen. V'yesh lahakal abali Tshuva. Says the Ramav, we should be make of abali Tshuva. Shalino those with Neim. We don't want people to be turned off from becoming Baalei Tshuva, and that is the minhag. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kov Chav Zayin, Shahara Yes Nefesh. What is the reason such a person cannot tochen dechsev? Says the Torah. That their hands are filled with blood. If they were forced to kill someone, then they could. Even though, what do you mean? They shouldn't have done it. They should have took the bullet themselves. If they didn't take the bullet, they are not puzzle for dochening because of that. What is the reason of the machaber that tshuva doesn't help? Even if they tshuva, like we pointed out, tshuva rewrites history. Still, it's true. He's about tshuva. It's true. He rewrote history. But still, to be a dayim elu, those hands, the very hands, sharing is a nefesh that killed someone. Ein roi lisa's kap of those very hands cannot be the conduit for blessing. Avol bishas tshuva dachav isha haravi pila. So when Rahman al-Islam pushed a pregnant woman and caused her to miscarry, he is still out of Nasas Kavadin Chav Mitza Ali Buran because there's no Chiyamisa for killing an Uber. Doesn't mean it's allowed, of course. It doesn't mean it doesn't have a din of a child. It doesn't mean that he just Mishmur just waited on abortion. All the Mishmur says is that one who kills the Uber is not Chayiv Misa. V'yeshar Misav Kadin Kof Lamin De'im V'chulu and L'Kavil Shav Mezid V'hachi Nog. Says the Ramah, we take in all Baalei Tshuva, we even let them dochen. V'yesh eza achronish machmir not one b'mezid. Ayin be'alacha, there are some that are machmir be'mezid. We finish off with the Mishnah Berurah, with the Dirshu over here, note number 133, says Dirshu, what does it mean? The reason why a kohen that killed someone can't dochem was kiyidechem damim maleyu. This pasuk says the Prisha is dealing with one who kills a Yisrael, and the Pri Megadim says b'shem the sefer seidol derech. Even if one kills a guy, he's not allowed to dochem. So the Mishnah Berurah, the Machaberas didn't weigh in. It just said killed someone. Was that a yid or a guy? So we're seeing a little bit of a machlekes over here because the Prisha says we go into the tam. The reason that pasuk is referring to killing a Yisrael. But the Pri Megadim quotes the Seidel Derech that says no. Even if you kill a guy, still consider your hands, your deichem are damim maleyu. Let's say v'im harag mi'osim shemaridim v'lei malin. Kigain, Musar, Imumar, someone that the Gemara Avodah says that one is allowed to lower into a pit and you don't have a chiv to save their life. The Pri Megadim says for such a person you would still be allowed to dochin. And finally, it says Dirshu, what if a kayin is over in halbanas panim? He embarrasses someone, which we know is similar to the Isser of Ritzicha. Says the Shevet HaLevi, mutarli, so he's still allowed to dochin. Why? Because it's not mamash yadayim, and it's not called yadayim melayos bedamim. But we see that embarrassing someone is really considered ritzicha. To the point, the Shevet HaLevi had to write this tshuva teaching us it's called ritzicha, but it's not called that his hands are filled with blood, and therefore such a person would yes be allowed to dochen. We'll pick it up from Siman Lamed Vav in the next year. B'siyata Dishmaya.